It is my pleasure to kick things off for you this morning. The Chancellor Circle is pleased to offer this virtual series to our business community and our members. And we hope through these calls, you'll find a source of information, but also a source of community. That's the goal here today. So rather than just the presentation, we hope that you will sit back, be relaxed, think strategically, and ask questions. Many of you have questions today, and we're going to try to get to as many of those as possible. For the Chancellor Circle members that are on the call today, I really wanted to take a moment just to thank you. Your support of the foundation and supporting student success over the years has not only made a difference every year, but is making a difference right now for the students that are in need, facing a crisis in their educational journey, but also their personal lives. Just this week, culinary staff served hundreds of free lunches to students specifically targeted in need based on our homeless population, or those that were formerly foster youth or single parents. Many of you on this call have helped in these efforts, including giving to our Emergency Students Assistance Fund. So I did want to mention that today. I haven't mentioned that really in depth on one of these calls yet, but we invite you that for anyone that would like to participate in contributing to the Emergency Assistance Fund, that's there on our website, the same website that you signed up for this call, you're able to give. You may even choose to designate your Chancellor Circle membership for the following year directly to this fund. So we do invite you if you're able to give, but please know, however, that as Chancellor Circle members over the last couple months, we want to make sure that we're providing a resource to you. Many of you are managing your businesses, and this is not a time to focus on giving back, but to take care of your family and your business. So please know that over the last couple months and into the next month, we've extended everyone's Chancellor Circle membership. You're not going to hear from us in terms of renewal, and we want you to be able to focus on caring for your families and businesses, and we ask that you support when we're able to come back and continue together. We're going to get started in talking about what's coming up in the next few minutes. Today, we're excited to offer an opportunity to talk with two business leaders from the community, both of which are close friends to the College of the Canyons. Before we introduce our guests, however, allow me to address a few housekeeping items as we've done each week. Now, many of you I know are Zoom pros by now, so just bear with me, but I do want to cover some bases. As you enter the meeting today, you will be on mute. That's not to say that we don't want to hear from you. It just cuts down on some noise and interference. The intention of this call is not to be a one-way conversation, however. So please, we know this can be challenging to generate an authentic conversation around a Zoom call. So please ask questions. I think this topic will generate a lot of questions, and that I'm not concerned about that, but we want to be able to manage this. So feel free to use the chat function to ask questions, or you can even write in the chat function of Zoom that you would like to speak up and we'll call on you. If you're on a phone today, rather than using the web-based application for Zoom, you can press *6 to mute yourself or unmute yourself. And we would be happy to take those comments. Jill and I will be fielding questions at the end of Brian and Christina's presentations. I want to talk a little bit about what we're looking forward to for next week. May 8th at 9 a.m., we're having a presentation, Business Not So Usual, Managing Your Business Through Times of Crisis. This is going to be a change of time. We're going to experiment over the next 2 weeks if 9 or 10 a.m. is better. So we're looking at starting at 9 a.m. And we look forward to receiving your feedback next week if 9 or 10 is more convenient for attendees. The presentation will be presented by Vice President Jeff Forrest here at the College of the Canyons. And we'll also hear from business owner and operator of Chick-fil-A at Valencia Town Center, Tom Williams. Jeff in particular will be giving the full-on presentation, has some great insight of some previous work that he's done in managing business and managing through crisis. And of course, Tom is in the trenches right now and can really speak to what he's doing. And he's doing great work in terms of leading his business. So that's enough of me, folks. We're getting ready to hear from our presenters. I want to first introduce Jill Milady. I've had a chance to introduce her each week, and I just want to share, rather than share a list of accomplishments that we know that she has and how much she loves College of the Canyons, I I want to just say thank you, Jill, for how much you have been an advocate of our students. One of the things that Jill has been passionate about these many years is the Chancellor Circle Mini Grant Program. And this program helps faculty find innovative programs and launch new ideas on campus. She's been an advocate for faculty in creating these programs for years. And just before I hand it over to you, I want to say thank you for how much you've done to support the Chancellor Circle. She is our chairwoman of the Chancellor Circle Steering Committee, and of course, president of Milady Direct Marketing, and she wanted to share a few words before we pass it back to Brian. Go ahead, Jill.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you, James. I want to welcome our Chancellor Circle members as well as our community leaders here this morning. For the past 3 weeks, we've been offering value-based content through our Zoom calls. Our speakers are Chancellor Circle members, and they're paired with industry experts. Today, we have our chair of our College of the Canyons Foundation Board, Brian Koegle of Poole, Shaffery and Koegle, and a Chancellor Circle member, Christina Flores from Logix Credit Union. I want to personally thank Dr. Diane Van Hook for her leadership and the idea of holding what was our quarterly business breakfast briefings in the new virtual Zoom world, which is every Friday. We want to make sure to reach out to our Chancellor Circle members and to our community leaders so that we can offer expert advice and real world experience as we all try to run our business in this new normal. By working together, we all benefit, and I have heard from so many members of the Chancellor Circle and community and how valued these briefings have been every week. I also want to thank our communication partner, the Valley Industry Association, specifically Hillary Broadwater, the chairwoman of VIA. Their partnership has helped us spread the word to their members, which has allowed them to attend this free breakfast briefing weekly. Our Friday briefings are always free and open to the business community and anyone who wants to join us. So I encourage you to spread the word. I know you'll see a lot of value today. We will have another breakfast briefing next Friday, and we look forward to seeing you there. And now I would like to turn it back over to James so we can get our briefing started. Thank you and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Jill. Folks, it's my pleasure to introduce Brian Koegle. He is a partner in the Employment and Labor Law Department of Poole, Shaffery and Koegle. With a focus on labor and employment law, Mr. Koegle provides counsel to employers across various industries regarding hiring practices, employment contracts, wage and hour issues, compensation, discipline, personnel documents, and termination matters. Brian is a friend of the college, a alumni of College of the Canyons. I consider him a friend, and of course, he is our chair of the College of the Canyons Foundation. And Brian, it's our pleasure to welcome you to this business briefing, and we welcome you to take it away.
Well, thank you, James. I appreciate it. Special thanks to Jill. Wonderful. Thank you for all of the great stuff you do with the Chancellor Circle. Dr. Van Hook, I know you're on the line today too. Thank you so much for asking me to host one of these events and give a little bit of an update on what it's going to look like here in the next few weeks as, God willing, we're all going to get back to a new version of what used to be normal. I can't say that we're going to get back to business as usual because I don't think we will be getting back to business as usual necessarily. First and foremost, James, can you just give me a thumbs up that we are good to go with the screen right now? Excellent. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a wild roller coaster of an 8 weeks. As many of you know, we have been dealing with one of the craziest crises in American and even worldwide history. We are now on the verge of getting to a point where the curve has been flattened. The curve is actually decreasing, and we're going to talk about what it looks like to reopen our economy, reopen our businesses, and get everyone back to work as quickly as possible. While we have politicians that are making these rules, really a lot of this is going to come down to you. You as the business owner, you as the decision maker. How you're going to roll these things out is going to be essential to the quality of what we come back on from an economic standpoint, from the community that we've built here in Santa Clarita in North Los Angeles County. But part of this process is going to be making sure we are leading. I've used this one before on several webinar presentations, but there's a wonderful quote by one of my favorite authors, Simon Sinek, that says, "Leadership is a choice and not a rank." You do not have to be the CEO to make a difference from a leadership perspective. So today, we're going to talk about a few steps that we're going to suggest and recommend for businesses as we're preparing to reopen. I want to start with the big picture and kind of work our way down into some of the minutia and some of the detail, because I want to make sure that everybody's thinking along these same lines. So first and foremost, and I cannot emphasize this enough, communication is key. Communication with your employees, communication with your leadership team, communication with your clients, communications with your supply chain, your vendors, the people that you rely upon. You should have a strategic plan put in place now, and if you don't already have one, you should start working on it probably this weekend, on what it needs to look like and who you need to be on the phone with, who you need to be in front of from a webinar standpoint, where you need to have actual personal interactions. There needs to be a plan on how you communicate and making sure you have a good team of people around you and that everybody's on the same page so that there aren't going to be miscues. There aren't going to be missed opportunities as you open up the doors and try to reestablish the new normal. The second point I put on the big picture here is setting realistic expectations. I had a client of mine text me late last night and said, hey, do you think everything's going to reopen tomorrow, meaning May 1st? I chuckled, and then I responded with a no, not even close. And everybody wants to know, when are we going to be open? Is it going to be today? Is it going to be May 15th? Are we looking at June 1st? Quite candidly, none of us really know. I don't think even the politicians who are making these policies know for certain. But if you set an unrealistic goal of we're going to be back to normal by the beginning of third quarter, you're setting yourself up for failure. Making sure that you've got a plan A and at least a plan B, if not a plan C, should be part of your planning process right now. The third point here, re-engaging a distracted workforce. I wordsmith this one a lot, and I'm still not perfectly happy with it, but here's what I'm trying to convey in this. As we bring back our employees into the workforce, as we bring them back to what we're going to try to call a new normal, they are still very much distracted. The nightly news, the internet, all of social media is still talking about this disease, this virus, its impact, the death toll that it's taking. I mean, listen, we've got a tracker on every major news channel out there telling us how many people have actually died in the last 24 hours, let alone the last 8 weeks. People still have concerns. They have emotions. If you have parents that work for you, they're worried about what's going to happen over summer. Are their kids going to have any childcare to go to so that they can return to work? Making sure that you are talking to and re-engaging with your workforce to get them back into the fold, to get that buy-in that you had, hopefully, before all the COVID-19 crises hit. This is going to be a real challenge for a lot of businesses. And if you set a plan today, you'll be able to have steps that you can then go back to point number one, communicate to your employees as to how you plan to go through this process. But re-engaging them, getting them back into the fold is going to be a key element to your success. The fourth point I have here, restoring culture. We have now all been working either from home or remotely or collaboratively, mixed use of sometimes people come in, sometimes people don't. We have employers that have reduced hours drastically for some of their employees. Getting back to what the culture of your business is going to be essential to your success. And part of this, again, goes back to communication, but reminding every single one of your team members and leading by example, saying, look, we're not going to be able to get back to where we were on February 28th, but we're going to find our new normal, and our culture is going to fit within this mold, and this is how we're going to do it. Making sure we've done that restoration of what it is you do, what gets you out of bed in the morning to go to your job, other than the paycheck, that's what needs to be focused on. And then my last bullet point here is patience. Patience with your team members, patience with your supply chain. It's hard for me to say, but patience with your governing agencies at the federal level, the state level, and the local level. Making sure that we understand that yes, everybody is working to try to get this thing reopened, but we're also taking into consideration and balancing out the health and safety and welfare of some of our most critical populations, such as the elderly or the infirm. So just remember to maintain patience. I know we've all been thrown the cliche 10,000 times probably this week, which is we're all in this together. Well, it is true in a certain respect, but if you look at your team and the reinstitution of your team, sorry about that. The key is going to be to make sure that you have the patience necessary to bring restoration back to your business. All right, so with those as kind of our big picture 5 items that we need to work through, I want to get down into a little bit more of the weeds. Reintegrating your employees back into your place of business, whether this happens on the 15th of May, June 1st, or September 30th. These are all going to be key elements that we have to keep in mind as we're reopening our doors. I want to go back to some of the decisions that were made sometimes weeks, maybe even a couple months ago, when the decisions were made to reduce hours or to potentially furlough employees, basically putting them in a layoff status, but indicating that you intend to bring them back to work at a certain point, versus full-blown layoffs. I've got many manufacturing companies that said, we don't believe that we're going to be coming back. So in this circumstance, we're just going to shut our doors now and we're going to let everybody go. Bringing those folks back in the event that you are coming back is really going to be an art. It's not going to be a science, it's going to be an art. The first thing that we have to consider is,
It's like, I don't get paid to deal with your nonsense.
Somebody's not on mute there, by the way, just so you know.
Yeah.
Please make sure your phones are on mute. The rehire packages that would need to come into play if you have furloughed or laid someone off are going to be necessary for you to have as part of the personnel file. Now, you may be able to bridge their employment. You may be able to come back and say, look, we're going to restore your seniority. We're not going to say your date of hire is actually June 1st, but we're going to go back to where your original date of hire is. But if you went through a process where you separated with the employee through a layoff or through a furlough of 1 payroll period or longer, you do have to go back and make sure that you're obtaining proper documentation. That will include a new Form W-4. That will include a new Form I-9. Now, if you just reduced hours for your employees or you furloughed them for less than a full payroll period or payroll cycle, you don't have to go through this process. But assuming for a moment that you did, these are the things we have to do. And then finally, you need to make sure that you're revising, updating, and communicating all of your revised policies. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. The second point of this is notice to the EDD. For those of your employees who have actually been laid off or who have been furloughed for more than 1 payroll period, they are currently receiving unemployment insurance benefits. Hopefully. I will tell you that there have been many snafus with the EDD, that is the Employment Development Department. They are working through many of those. I just sat through a webinar on Tuesday of this week with the EDD talking about some of the technological problems that they've had trying to communicate with recipients of unemployment insurance benefits. And when you have nearly 4.5 million Californians who have some sort of benefit coming from the EDD, you can imagine how difficult it is to navigate that. But what's going to be fascinating is bringing the employees back to work now that they have become accustomed to, for all intents and purposes, sitting at home, not doing the work, and drawing unemployment insurance benefits to the tune of a maximum benefit of $450 from the state, but there's also this $600 additional sum that is being paid by the federal government through the EDD to these employees. When we first started talking about this about 6 weeks ago, the understanding or the impressions from most attorneys and from most counselors were that that was just going to be an additional sum that was going to be an up to limit. So in other words, if you were a high wage earner, you were no longer going to just be capped at $450 a week. You'd actually be able to accrue more benefit than that. Rather, in these circumstances, even employees who are just reduced hours by 25% or more, for instance, if they went from 40 hours a week down to 25 hours a week, they get a supplemental state benefit, and then they get the full $600. It's going to be very difficult to wean people back into the workplace, especially if you have low wage earners, when they've been able to sit at home, draw a paycheck without having to put in the effort. But notifying the EDD is going to be part of your obligations as an employer. Why? Because when you have work, you have the right to insist that the employee comes back to work, assuming that you furloughed them or you put them on restricted hours. You cannot have an employee who goes, hey, actually, boss, I'd like to sit at home and draw my unemployment. If you have work, you tell them that you have work, you communicate it to them in writing. If they fail to show up and they fail to accept your offer of reinstatement, you notify the EDD that that employee has not accepted reinstatement into your programs, and therefore they will be cut off on their benefits moving forward. Additionally, you do need to speak with your CPAs and with your specific attorney on the effect of any Paycheck Protection Program loan monies that you've received. We're receiving day-to-day updates on what is and is not going to be forgivable as part of the PPP. And in this circumstance, you need to take into consideration how you're compensating employees, how you are restoring them to pre-COVID salary numbers or hour numbers, et cetera, because those are preconditions of the PPP program in order for you to obtain loan forgiveness. So make sure that you understand what those rules of the road are, specific as to your loan, specific as to your business. I can't give you a general cookie cutter policy on something like this because every business is different on how they dealt with the problem at the front end and how they plan to fix the problem on the back end if they got the PPP loans. Do not forget that when you reinstate your employees, that all of those obligations under the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act will still apply. So for instance, if you did a reduction in force or you did a layoff or a full furlough on March 15th or March 30th, before the benefits kicked in for the FFCRA, those employees who are coming back to work will be entitled to that. That includes 2 weeks of paid sick leave at the full boat, their regular rate of pay that you, the employer, will be responsible to pay for in the event that they become ill or that they've been quarantined by a doctor or put into an isolation order. Additionally, the childcare or school closures that we're still dealing with, and probably it looks like we're going to be dealing with through the summer and possibly even into the fall here in California specifically, employees may not have proper childcare. There's no place to send their children, even though we're going to be talking about this being in the months of June and July and August, when typically kids are home anyway. But if there's no childcare, they may be entitled to receive up to 12 weeks of paid leave at 2/3 of their regular rate of pay. Just remember that these folks do still have these rights under federal law after they have been reinstated. Now, if you had already provided these benefits to them prior, then there's no need to give them new benefits when you bring them back. It's only one set of leave per employee in a rolling 12-month cycle. Okay, so that's what I wanted to talk about as our big broad brushstrokes for reintegrating our employees. Now I want to talk about policy revisions. Many of you have seen us speak year in and year out. We do these presentations on a regular basis, reminding employers that they need to go back and take a look at their written policies, their handbooks, their employee handbooks that get handed out, and any other kind of safety manuals that are out there. Never has this been more important than right now. It's a great opportunity for everyone to clean up their act, make sure they've got accurate policies in place that are up to date with the California laws as they're set up currently, but also dealing with issues that now result around health and safety and wellness in the workplace. So here are a few things that I think that every business owner should be looking at to have a written policy in place that gets communicated to your employees. First, we're going to start with a timeline for your anticipated return to work, including any expectations you have for modified work duties. What do I mean by this? Well, you may not be able to dictate when your business opens, right? Because you have to go and comply with all of the regulations from the state of California, from the county of Los Angeles, if you're in LA County, and then in certain circumstances, even a municipality. For some of the businesses who are in the city of Santa Clarita, there are additional obligations and rules and restrictions that come from the city as well. So we have to be thoughtful about making sure that we're compliant with all of these policies prior to opening. And while we may not necessarily be able to script that out, we can at least start putting a program in place that if we open by this date, this is how we're opening. If we open 30 days later, this is how we're opening, and this is how we modify it. And candidly, I think this is a great time for you to communicate these policies to the employees who are currently around, who may be teleworking, those that you intend to bring back once the workload starts back up again. All of these should be communicated, though, to your employees so they understand what you're thinking about, what your planning is, and again, it shows good leadership skills. The second thing that now must be published and must be in writing are your cleaning and social distancing policies, protocols, and procedures. If you do not already have the notification up from the CDC, please make sure you download that notification. It is just a basic reminder, reminding everyone to socially distance, to wash their hands frequently, to use antibacterial hand sanitizer whenever they've touched a common surface. All of the common sense things that we think about, that CDC notification basically covers in a one sheet. So it's very important to have that up. Secondarily, if your business is one that deals specifically with the public, people are coming into your place of business, you're either retail or restaurant, food service, or banking, something along those lines, then you need to make sure that you've got policies as to how you're going to be dealing with the public from a social distancing standpoint. How are you going to make sure that you've got the tape on the floors like they have at Costco in the grocery stores to make sure we're maintaining the social distancing protocols? Because let me make something clear. I do not believe the social distancing protocols are going to be lifted anytime in the next 3 to 4 months. It wouldn't surprise me if we had the social distancing requirements through the end of 2020. The next point that needs to be communicated, notification of general health and safety policies and your enforcement protocols. What do I mean by this? Are you conducting employee health screenings? You're allowed to, you're permitted to ensure that folks are healthy and safe to come back to work. I've had many employers ask me, is it okay if we take our employees' temperature on a daily basis before they come into our manufacturing plant? Well, the answer is yes, you can, but what are you going to do with that data, right? Because that data is personal, it's private to that individual employee. It's not something that should be communicated to anyone else. Secondarily, there are rules and restrictions about what we're allowed to use that information for. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission at the beginning of March came out and said, listen, in order to help curb COVID-19, you're allowed to test for temperature before someone walks in, but it must be tied to the COVID-19 principle. You can't just generally test people for their temperature. Why? Because that's protected information under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So the long story short is if you choose to, you are permitted to take temperature and go through a health screening before you bring your employees back to work. But if you are going to do that, you need to make sure it's communicated to your employees in writing in advance of you actually performing those tests. Next, we need to make sure that we have a written policy regarding the use of personal protective equipment. We all now know this to be the face masks that we're required to use when we're interacting with others. The gloves that if you're going to be touching common surfaces where the germs can be spread. These are all things that need to be provided by the employer in order to ensure the safety of the employees. We need to have one policy that interacts with what are you going to do if people are working in the same office suite or they're working side by side in a manufacturing plant or on a line where food is being processed? How are you going to help maintain social distancing? How are you going to allow inter-office interactions to take place? Are people still going to be required to wear masks even if they're walking within their own enclosed office space? These are all policies that need to be discussed and reviewed with your council. Dealing with the public, your clients, vendors who are coming in. Do we have a restriction on when people can come into your office space or when you're going to allow visitors into your workspace? These are all things that need to be policy, they need to be written, and they need to be communicated. And then finally, the providing, the maintaining, and the disposal of the PPE. Depending on what type of work circumstance you're working within, you may actually have to deal with the waste, the paper masks, the gloves, etc., as a biohazard. And you need to make sure you're disposing of that properly. So these are all policies that need to be in writing and communicated to your employees. A couple more policies that I am really encouraging employers to make sure that they have. making sure that you have modified your leave of absence and illness policies and protocols. Never has it ever been more important to have a good process for the interaction when someone comes to you when they say that they're ill or injured, right? Because the circumstances of COVID-19 have kind of driven this dialogue of, well, if one person has it, everybody around may end up being contaminated. While that is true, we need to focus as employers on the person who is actually ill. So we need to make sure that we're looking at our reasonable accommodation process, how we interact with our employees to find out what it is that they need in order to be able to continue on in their job in a healthy and safe way. You also have to make sure we're reasonably accommodating the childcare and the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act issues that have come into play that we talked about a couple slides back. Making sure that you are patient and you're continuing your communication on these issues is going to be essential as your employees come back. And then finally, if you don't have an existing policy in writing regarding telework or working from home, this is the time to put it together. What if someone comes in and says, hey, I'll come into the office 3 days a week, but I'd like to telework 2 days a week? Well, okay, in this circumstance, it's very hard for us as business owners to come back and say, well, no, that won't work. We can't have you telework. Why? They've been doing it for the last 6 to 8 weeks, and it has worked. Maybe not as efficiently, or maybe there are some hiccups that come along with that, but understand that that telework policy is going to come into play as we start talking about reasonable accommodation issues. Modifying your business travel policies. If you've got sales team members who fly all around the world, what are we going to do when they have flown into a foreign land? Or are you going to require them to be in a quarantine period if they travel to a hot spot where COVID is prevalent among the communities? How are you going to limit or restrict people from air travel and making sure that they're not booking middle seats? Although right now I understand airlines aren't even allowing you to book middle seats. Do you want to make sure that you're providing a little bit of extra leniency for those folks who are traveling on a more frequent basis? So that's a great policy for you to be able to go back and revise right now also. Most handbooks already have a statement that bans retaliation, but I want to make sure that I'm flagging it for everyone right now. Why? Because any employee who has exercised their rights under the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act, or under FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act, or for anything that is a protected leave of absence, we have to make sure that we are restating and re-emphasizing to our managerial teams and to our lower level supervisors that the company's policy is that we do not retaliate against someone for exercising their rights. Why do we say it that way? Well, there's going to be a lot of folks with chips on their shoulder when they come back to work. It's going to be a tough time. People are going to probably exhibit a lot of attitude. And the last thing we want is supervisors and managers making snap decisions on the fact that they don't think that they were treated properly or it was an insubordinate act. Because in those circumstances, the claims for retaliation are going to skyrocket. I can almost guarantee that. Making sure that we have a policy or procedure to report employees who are violating your COVID-19 policies. If you have a progressive discipline policy, and I hope you don't have a progressive discipline policy, we now have to actually work in a statement that says any violation of these new policies subjects you to a discipline up to and including termination. We need to make sure that we've got written authorization that if people aren't doing what we've asked them to do from a policy and procedure standpoint, that we have the right to discipline, including terminating employment. If you already have an alcohol or drug screening process, including pre-employment screening, this is a great time for you to go back and take a look at it. I read a report that came out from one of the local HR publications that indicated that drug use, recreational drug use, including recreational marijuana, alcohol, et cetera, had gone up over 450% during the lockdown period. What does that mean? Well, if you had a situation where we have to go through rehire, as I had mentioned on one of the prior screens, that means that as part of the rehire process, you would have to drug screen your employees. Do we want to have a relaxed standard? Do we want to change our existing drug policies? Because if you haven't reviewed it in the last 2 or 3 years, it probably still lists marijuana or cannabis products as a Class 1 substance, and therefore if somebody tests positive, they would be denied employment opportunity. So make sure you've gone back, if you have a policy in place already, to make sure that you are editing it to accommodate the circumstances that we're dealing with. And then finally, making sure that you are restating on every single one of these policies that you're communicating to your employees that this is still an at-will employment arrangement, that you, the business owner, or they, the employee, have the full and complete right to end the business relationship, the employment relationship, at any time, with or without advance notice, and with or without cause. Making sure that there is no expectation of continued employment just because you're restoring them from a furlough, just because you're rehiring them after a layoff. We want to make sure that we have that restated and communicated clearly in all of our policies. So those are my slides. I see that we have many, many questions. I think what I will do is I will turn this back over to James so that he can make the decision as to whether or not we move on to Chris or whether we take some questions now and then move on to Chris. James, back to you.
Thank you, Brian. Brian, that was wonderful. I do want to give an opportunity for Christina Flores to speak for a few minutes. We do have many questions, and we made a decision before the call started that in anticipation of many questions, we are going to keep the conversation going for maybe another 15 minutes. I want to just give you a heads up. Many of you may have a hard stop at 11, and we do want to make sure that we honor that time. But we're going to answer as many questions as possible. But I do want to make sure that we hear from Christina. Christina, if you're ready, I'm going to give you a quick moment. Christina is the Vice President of Human Relations at Logix Federal Credit Union. Excuse me. She is also a Chancellor's Circle member on behalf of her entire organization. For the last 15 years, she's pursued her passion to help people reach their greatest potential, and I know that Logix does this really well from an employee standpoint. Her education does include human resources and marketing from Colorado State University, and she's here today to talk about her perspective from this climate that we're in, from the HR environment at Logix Federal Credit Union. So, Christina, I'm going to hand it back over to you for the next five or 10 minutes,
Sure.
And then we'll take some questions after that. Thank you, Christina.
Of course, and I know everybody has some important questions. Great information, Brian, and so timely. I wanted just to cover a few things and just share kind of what we're working on as far as strategies that we've had with Logix. As Brian mentioned, communication is important, well-being, and then looking forward at what the future workplace looks like and what the new norm is going to be. So one of the things that I would just say is really important is staying connected. And you'll see there's a picture of my HR team, and we just took a moment just to talk about what we're dealing with at a personal level after dealing with a good month and a half of just craziness and taking care of other people. And it's important to reflect back, whether a business owner or employee or HR employee, to really take time to take care of yourself. And I think we're all going through similar things. And below is a quote that just mentions, that we really need to have compassion with others because we're all juggling life. We're all dealing with homeschooling, if you have kids, and pushing through our fears. We have fears too, even though we're in HR, but we just try to navigate people through those moments. So really important to be authentic and intentional. And communication, I think another area that Logix has done well is we created a Be Well portal and asked the task force process for answering any questions and addressing any concerns employees have. So you can see that we created just some categories we thought were important and updates from our CEO, executive team, and anonymous channels. So if people felt shy about asking questions with HR, they could ask an anonymous question and we'd publish and answer it, and different parts of the organization took place in helping with those communications. We also provided some free resources and health and well-being resources, which I'll share at the end, which I think are great to offer any type of meditation, yoga, and dealing with stress and anxiety, as well as just learning how to be a great remote worker. So I'll share some resources later. And then one thing that we did as an essential business, we had to pivot quickly. So I'm glad to say that we have about 80% of our workforce working remote right now. It's definitely been a shift. I think, for the most part, it's gone very well. People have been able to work productively, but we're also thinking about the future because we have different channels We have our retail side, and then we have our back office. So discussion has begun about returning to the workplace, even though we have some of our branch employees working remote. As Brian mentioned, you know, social distancing is going to be normalized. This is not going to go away overnight. We have to plan for that. And being a company that's very based on connecting and personal service, we just have to adjust to that and find a ways to still deliver and be safe. So, and then the question is, you know, should our remote work plan continue? Many people are dealing with childcare issues and healthcare challenges, and maybe family members who are at risk at home. So there's a lot of fear about returning back to work. So we're just trying to be kind of patient and take a slow roll to bringing people back, and just maybe kind of have a plan to start transitioning people slowly but surely back to the workforce. And then we're moving to Santa Clarita, so we're kind of bursting at the seams in Burbank. So in a way, we kind of have to think about remote work a little bit more seriously, because we have to social distance and we don't have a lot of room until we move to our new building. Temperature taking, which Brian mentioned too, just doing everything possible to make employees feel a little more secure about being at work. There is a lot of things that you have to consider when temperature taking, also the operational impacts if you have a lot of people coming to a site. So we're looking at different options, some scanning machines that are non-invasive. So that is also something we're looking at. And then expanding sick time, because we're an employer of over 500. Some of the new kind of paid sick leave laws didn't apply. So what we did was provide, you know, no questions if someone is sick for any reason, just giving them an automatic additional 3 days of sick time. And that way people don't feel the pressure to come to work and have income or be concerned about income for those 3 days. And then with dealing with some of the positive cases, we did have a few positive cases of COVID happen. And in those cases, we offered up to 10 days of additional time off as an employer, even though we're not required, because it is important that people have peace of mind. Some of the other things that we did to keep our employees safe is we obviously implemented the mandatory mask wearing. We hired day porters, created hand sanitizing stations, and did deep cleaning when we did have a positive case, because we wanted people to feel safe coming back to work. And that's another important thing about communication, is really, you know, having a policy is super important, and that must be done, but also just letting employees know exactly what you're doing to keep them safe and keeping that top of mind so they feel secure about that. And here's just a list of resources that are my go-tos right now. Being a California employer, it's really important just to get your latest and greatest. And these have been resources I've leaned on. Also, you know, really leaning on other business owners and HR professionals. If you can join your local PIRA chapter meetings, they have often meetings there. There's so many free webinars. So I think if you look at some of these resources, you'll find a lot of free webinars on topics and free resources. In fact, PIRA is offering a free membership through July, and I provided the HR Cornerstone on-demand link for some free videos that employees can access from home. There's like 20 yoga videos, and again, meditation, other things. So great resources to provide employees for well-being. And lastly, I just want to conclude that it's really important to be kind to yourself. It's really stressful dealing with this, and you know, employees are going through a lot of stress. So just make sure you don't burn yourself out. Take the time, be with your families, and enjoy what you can, those little moments, find the silver lining. And it is true, you know, reach out to your community. This is a great call, and I'm grateful for Brian's information to share. You never can learn too much. All of us are learning this, and I think we really, truly will get through this together better. So I just want to thank you for your time and appreciate this call.
Thank you, Christina. I love that photo of Anna there. That's wonderful. Logix has such an amazing culture, and I think you're demonstrating a lot of things that Brian was presenting as far as best practices. So I don't want to waste any time. We've got 15 minutes left as far as our stop at 11. And again, Brian and Christina have been gracious enough to give us a few more extra minutes after that. Again, we'd love to hear from you. Many of you have been responding to us in the chat. You can do that. Some of you have been messaging me privately. You can do that, or you can make a public question, and we will see that as well. And again, if you even want to write in the chat that says, I have a question I'd like to ask, we'll unmute you, or you can unmute yourself as well when we call on you. So let's go into the first question. Brian, I'm going to start with you and ask a question kind of that Marcia and Steve on the call here were both asking. What type of lawsuits do you anticipate that may emerge around COVID? And how can we as business leaders and business owners help to defend against such of these suits? And again, this is similar to a question that Steve asked, as far as you mentioned a progressive review policy, how that wouldn't be a good idea. And do you have any examples or maybe suggestions of how business owners can write policy and employment documentation?
So let me start with that. Let me start with that last question first, if you don't mind. Then, so when I said no progressive discipline policy, it's fine to have a written policy that lays out your course of discipline, right? You can have verbal warnings, written warnings. You can have suspensions without pay, and then termination. A progressive discipline policy, though, says we are going to follow these steps. Your first violation, you will get a verbal. Your second violation, you will get a written, and so on and so forth. Rather, what we do as at-will employers in California is we reserve the right to say, look, on your first mistake, we reserve the right to terminate your employment immediately if we choose to. We don't have to go through the steps, the process of progressive discipline. That's what I meant by that comment, so I apologize if that wasn't clear. But when we start talking about the lawsuits that are coming out of this, we've been talking about this as a group, as a defense counsel in California for the better part of 5 weeks now. And we do see a lot of issues that are going to come about. First and foremost, I think the number one claims that we're going to see are wage and hour claims, right? Why? People are working from home or teleworking on a regular basis. And they're going to say, I was so busy because the work was just so intense that I didn't even have time to take my breaks or my meal periods. Or, while I was clocking in and out, I was really doing work after hours because I was sitting on my couch and got bored watching Netflix. These are the types of things that we're going to see. And unfortunately, because the employer didn't have complete control over the circumstances, we don't know whether or not the courts are going to look at this with a strict liability type standard that we have seen from most wage and hour claims. But right behind wage and hour violations and claims such as that, we do anticipate that we're going to see a number of wrongful termination claims and retaliation claims. Why? Well, this group of people were selected for layoff because we didn't have work for them to do. Among those people were people who had workers' compensation claims, had medical disabilities, were minorities that were underrepresented in the business place. And they're going to come back and say that the real reason that I was selected for layoff or for the furlough and others weren't, or I was impacted more, is because of my disability, because of my workers' comp claim, because of my ethnicity. And the claims based upon retaliation and wrongful termination and constructive wrongful termination. What does that mean? Well, basically, it's you didn't say you're fired, but for all intents and purposes, they were out of their job. So those are going to be the primary areas that we're trying to keep our eye on to make sure that employers are doing what they can to avoid those problems. But the best remedy for all of these issues, right? Whether we're talking wage and hour violations, whether we're talking selection criteria for layoffs or for furloughs, is making sure you have good documentation, right? Making sure that you've got physical paper that says what you did, why you did it, and when you did it. Making sure that you've got folks that are working from home that either have an electronic timekeeping system that shuts them out of the computer or shuts them out of their email at 5:30 p.m. Having these type of processes in place, having the documentation, having those policies that I talked about on slides 3 and 4 earlier today, these are all essential elements to help you avoid liability once everything gets lifted and you've got employees who go and find your friendly neighborhood plaintiff's attorney.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. Christina, I'm going to ask you a question coming from Ed. Even with companies and HR departments doing their best to maintain positive outlook during the crisis, and this includes an organization like yours where you still have frontline employees dealing with the public as well as a huge workforce working remotely, how has anxiety and uncertainty affected employee morale, and I know you touched a little bit of this on the presentation, but are you doing anything specifically to kind of curb that?
Yes, honestly, this is the hard thing because everybody's level of anxiety and how they deal with it is different. We're just trying to be understanding. We did create personal leaves for those who really were in fear of coming to work. It is unpaid, but we wanted to provide whatever possible means to address some of these issues. At the end of the day, we do need to get back and serve our members and, be successful as a business so that we can keep people employed. So I think really, again, just communicating everything we're doing to keep them safe. We've taken extra measures. And, if they truly do have some concerns due to like being at risk or other issues, there's a lot of different benefits that they can qualify for. So we're looking at every possible option for them. We haven't furloughed people, but I think sometimes, to Brian's point, some people probably want to be furloughed just because they might earn more or just be at peace at home. So we're trying to find the balance between that, like what's the right thing to do for the employee. But we are busy. So that's the other concern that we have, is that we still have our business needs to meet. And that's the difficult question. And I think lots of businesses are going to have to navigate through that, which we're in the middle of right now too. So just being understanding and empathetic, I think, is the best we can do, and not judging, just taking the word for it. And, like I said, everybody has different levels of anxiety that we need to meet them where they're at.
I have a question that I think will pertain to Brian about the PPP loan. If you get your PPP loan and your business is not open, how fast or what date do you have to bring people back so you don't have to repay the loan? Would you know about that, Brian?
Yeah, I do. So this is actually an interesting question because it's actually up for debate in Congress as we speak right now. So right now, the way that the loan process and the loan program was approved by the Senate and then approved by the House and signed by the President under the CARES Act, the deadline to have everyone brought back and to restore them to their regular rate of pay was June 30th. So if you didn't bring people back before June 30th, or you didn't restore them to their full pay before June 30th, you lost out on the forgiveness element of the PPP. And let me just clarify something. Just because you lose out on the forgiveness doesn't mean that you don't get the loan. Remember, this is an extremely low interest loan, 1%, with repayment terms over 2 years, with no payments due for the first 6 months, right? So it just converts to a low interest loan in that circumstance in the event that you're unable to bring people back. With that being said, Congress is considering an extension of this. I've heard 2 dates that have been proposed. One was December 31st, 2020. The other one is September 30th. I think it's probably more practical and more likely to see September 30th as that date, because again, remember that the purpose of the PPP loans was to get people off of unemployment, right? So this is, if you think of the government taking money out of the left pocket and putting it into the right pocket, they're saying, instead of us paying your employees to sit at home and watch Oprah, we want you to pay your employees to sit at home and watch Oprah. And that's basically the way that the PPP loan was designed and set up to affect employers. Remember that you do have an 8-week window to take a look at between February 15th, 2020 and June 30th, 2020, when you're looking at your repayment process for those PPP funds. So hopefully that answers your question. Right now, the deadline to do this is June 30th. We have every belief that that date will be moved. I think the most likely date right now is going to be September 30.
Okay, thank you. And the next question is for you, Brian, as well, from Marcia. What type of new employee lawsuits do you anticipate will emerge from COVID? And as business owners, managers, what should we be prepared for, and how can we be preemptive in our defense against such suits? Is there any certain paperwork or forms that you recommend we have employees fill out?
Yeah, so that one I kind of had already handled, Jill, prior. And I talked about the fact that the wage and hour claims are going to be prevalent. We're also going to see some retaliation and wrongful termination issues. Again, document, document, document. I cannot stress this enough. This isn't just new and novel for COVID. This is across the board from an HR standpoint regardless. So with that being said, making sure that we've got those documents in place, changing our written policies, as I mentioned on those slides, and communicating those written policies to our employees are really, truly our best defense.
Thank you, Brian.
Do you mind if I jump in? Because I've got a couple of questions that were asked of me privately. Is that okay, guys?
Please do.
And since some of these are kind of grouped together, I wanted to kind of address them together. You know, what are we going to do in the event that people don't want to come back to work, right? They tell you, hey, listen, I don't want to come back to your restaurant because I'm afraid that I'm going to get the virus. This is going to sound cold, it's going to sound callous, but it's truth. Legally speaking, you can tell your employees, you either come back to work or you will be terminated. You have a job to do. You have an obligation to fulfill. We're going to provide you with all the safety and health precautions that we need to provide you with in order to keep you safe. If you don't come back to work, we're going to basically let you go. Understanding in those circumstances, some people may get real excited about that. Sweet, I get let go. Well, the problem is if they had work available and they declined that work, they will be ineligible for unemployment insurance benefits. That includes the $600 supplement from the federal insurance program. So that means that they will not get any unemployment. And you should communicate that when you're talking to them about the fact that you have a job, that there is available work for them to do, and that you expect them to return and do the job that they want. Listen, fear of this virus is not a defensible claim based upon employment at this point. Stemming from that, though, and one of the other concerns is, what kind of liability do I have as an employer in the event that I do bring somebody back that didn't want to come in and they do become ill? Well, it's a really interesting phenomenon. At this point, if there are no stay-at-home or safer-at-home restrictions that you're in violation of, right? Meaning when we wait until your industry is released to go ahead and bring your employees back, if an employee becomes ill in the course and scope of their employment, that's really just a scenario that falls within common hazards of dealing with the public. The Workers' Compensation Insurance Review Board, about 4 weeks ago now, about 4 to 5 weeks ago, came out and said, listen, unless they're in a very high risk position, such as doctors and nurses or folks working in a hospital, we're not going to call a COVID illness that arises from a workplace injury to be a workers' comp claim. We're going to deny those claims. Now, understanding that we will have to provide leave pursuant to the FFCRA, including potential extended leave if they become very ill, but those are all elements that are limited within the course and scope of what that bill package provides. There is not going to be any additional liability. There is no additional lawsuit as long as you've taken all of the steps prescribed by the CDC regarding cleanliness, social distancing, and personal protective equipment. That's all you're required to do as an employer.
Thank you, Brian. In a minute, folks, we have reached 11 o'clock. Thank you again for anyone that needs to step out. Please plan to join us next week at 9 a.m. That is a change of time again. And the topic again is business not so usual, managing your business in times of crisis. 9 a.m. We are going to extend this for another 15 minutes. Thank you for our presenters for being willing to do that and hang with us, and we'll get some questions answered. I have a question for Christina, and then I'm going to hand it over to David Green, who's on the call, and he has a question for Brian. Christina, this is from Lucy. I'd love to hear more about people who are looking at planning around hiring or layoffs, furloughs for the next year. Now, Logix may or may not be handling all of those types of situations, but are you looking at stages of recovery, and how do you go about figuring out how many people you'll need based on stay-at-home orders? I know there is no clear answer and crystal ball here, but I think we'd all benefit from kind of your thinking and how you're approaching the subject.
So what we've done is we did have some reduction in hours for our branches, and what we did was we redeployed some of those employees to help other areas in the business that were seeing volumes, like for example, our call center. You know, when the stimulus checks came, there's a lot of calls and other issues. So we're redeploying staff so we can keep them employed, but we also reduced some individuals' hours based on the request or in essence, I mean, we were able to still pay people their regular hours in the case that we did close our branches early. But in the future, you know, again, we all have to take a look at business expenses and revenue and things like that. So I think if it did come to the point where we did need to look at something that we try to do our best to maybe not replace people that leave the organization. We are discussing, you know, kind of slowing down hiring and only hiring for essential positions. And we all know that headcount is one of the biggest expenses typically in an organization is the people cost. So I think that's the way we're going to start looking at things. And, you know, our hope again is not to have to lay people off, but you always have to plan ahead. So, you know, in the case of layoffs and things like that, obviously if we just slow down in certain areas, then we would need to look at that option, but we would look at redeploying people in other areas. Cause again, we've spent dollars training people. And so you want to retain and not have to do all those steps during a time like this. So that would be the approach that we would take. And I know other organizations and peers of mine, you know, they have had to furlough people. The only good thing is that at least through July, you know, people will get if they're making, you know, a certain dollar amount in their salary, wouldn't take that big of a hit if it's an entry-level role. But for higher compensated individuals, it would be, you know, much more of an impact. But that's the approach that we've been taking, is just trying to cut operation expenses.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you. David offered a question, and I know he's on the call. David Green, go ahead and unmute yourself. He's a Chancellor Circle member with Virtual Train. David, go ahead and ask a question. I think you have one for Brian.
Thanks, James, and hi, Brian, and thanks, Christina and Brian, for all this information. It's been very helpful. And Brian, my question's for you. I wanted to know if you think there's an increased risk of workers' comp claims if a worker gets injured while they're working at home. We had an employee who actually broke her leg on a bike ride over the weekend, and it was over the weekend, so she wasn't working. But if it had happened on a Monday or Tuesday, is that a possibility? And you're muted.
You're muted, Brian. Oh, Brian, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Thank you, David. Appreciate the question. It's actually a great question. I've been dealing with, we've been talking about this exact issue among a group of defense attorneys. What's really fascinating is we haven't seen those claims yet. We are anticipating those claims, absolutely, right? I had a client who just asked me a question, I think it was on Tuesday, about a slip and fall that took place in a woman's kitchen. She took a break and walked into the kitchen and slipped and smacked her head on a countertop and had to go and get stitches. And he goes, what do I do? I said, well, you should at least give her the workers' compensation forms, because we're required to do that by law within 24 hours. She may choose not to fill it out because she was the silly person who didn't clean up the water on the floor of her personal kitchen. But do I see those type of cases converting into workers' comp claims? Yes, I do. Do I see the liability of business owners being higher as a result of that? Not necessarily. What will be interesting and what we'll have to see as time goes on is how the workers' comp insurance agencies and carriers are actually handling these types of claims. I don't know if they have any internal policies that are working on this particular issue yet. I do know that telework and working from home are covered under workers' compensation policies, but where we go and whether or not there's going to be limitations, especially when it comes to safety-related injuries, that I think is going to be yet to be seen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian, I have a question for you.
Okay.
What permanent changes do you expect in our new normal in regards to HR? For example, should we change anything permanently, like in our handbooks or new hire paperwork? This is from Marcia.
Yeah, so some of those I touched on at the beginning of the presentation. I do think that there need to be changes to policy across the board. Listen, if nothing else, we're at least prepared for the next COVID-19. And I hate to say it that way, but the truth is this is just the first, I think, in a series or a litany of potential claims or issues that are going to come up. So with that being said, my recommendations are that, yes, we have written policies that are changed and that they are going to be in effect and basically permanent within the structure of our business as we move forward. Now, with that being said, do I think that HR in its core functions and core roles are going to change dramatically or drastically? I don't. Do I think that HR professionals are going to have to really practice their zen of patience? Yes, I absolutely do. I think it's going to put a huge burden upon our HR teams, because the number of people who have questions and they expect HR to have the answers, and HR just simply isn't going to have all those answers. Patience is going to be necessary, and it's going to be a key or critical component to how we transition these folks back moving forward.
And I have one more question. Those people who are on part-time unemployment, are they eligible for the $600 from the federal government? I believe you mentioned that.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So we were told very early on that only employees who lost 50% or more of their income based upon reduction of hours or reduction in pay would be eligible for the $600 benefit from the federal government. That has not been what has occurred in reality. We have employees who have been cut 25% that have in fact received that benefit, that extra $600 per week that gets provided between April 1st and July 31st. So in that circumstance, if an employee has been cut, and I can only speak to the 25% threshold because I've seen it personally in a couple of the businesses that I counsel. We haven't seen it yet in any smaller chunk increments, but it's possible that that could happen as well. But at 25%, if those hours or the pay had been reduced, those folks are being paid that extra $600. I got a couple of other piggybacks on this just real quickly. There was one question that said, do I foresee them extending that $600 benefit beyond the July 31st deadline? And the answer is no. The funding just simply isn't there from the CARES Act. It would require them to go back and refund that particular aspect of things. Now, if we have a majority of states that aren't reopened by July 31st, which I just can't wrap my brain around, but let's just say that that happened, then yes, I could see Congress going back to the well, asking for more money, diverting additional funds to the states to pay that benefit moving forward. But I mean, let's call it what it is. I mean, everybody on this phone line is a business owner or a leader within your organization. This was one of the worst parts of the CARES Act, right? Why? Because it is paying people a flat $600 regardless of merit, regardless of costing, regardless of their income, just because they had their hours reduced or they lost or they were put on a furlough. So that's a dangerous position to be in. But one of the other questions that had piggybacked on this one as well was, does an unemployed person actually, or a furloughed person, have to apply separately for that $600? And the answer is no. The $600 is automatic, that if you are qualified for unemployment insurance benefits in California, you will receive that benefit on top of the regular weekly stipend that is provided by the state.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Folks, we're going to wrap up. I just want to give Christina one more chance to, she has a couple extra thoughts on some of the questions that were just answered, and then we'll thank everyone and we'll be wrapping up. Christina? Oh, you're on mute, Christina.
Just a lesson learned I wanted to share, especially when you're hiring and onboarding during this time. Once you make an offer to a new hire, don't forget to ask the screening questions before they start. And also, we started taking temperatures on day one, because we have had situations where people ended up testing positive before starting. And so just to protect your employees and have a good process in place, just make sure it's after the offer is made. But I just wanted to give you that lesson learned as well, that to keeping employees safe at the workplace.
Thank you again. Well, both of you, Brian and Christina, you are champions and giants in your fields. We appreciate your feedback today, but also your leadership in our community and the College of the Canyons Foundation. We are going to wrap this up. I just want to say thank you again. We provided some contact information at the beginning of the call, so if you scroll all the way up to that chat, you'll see contact information for Christina, Jill, and Brian, and feel free to reach out to them. Stay in contact with us as well. If you'd like to see something on these chats or calls rather in the future, we're going to try to continue to do them at a regular basis for as long as they are relevant and helpful for business owners. We do want to see you next week, and we want to thank you again for your participation. I'll see you at 9 a.m. If you visit that same link that you've been going to for our COC Alumni Network, you can find that new event, and an email will also be sent out this afternoon. So thank you again. Have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next week.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.